how cold the air can be, how he can be lost so quickly through the window of opportunity, just like a draft in the night. See how words can twist and hands can ring like phones inside empty homes when nobody's there to hear. Oh, do you hear me, dear? Oh, cry me away, hey, 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 yeah. Cry me away, hey, hey, yeah. Cry me away, hey, 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 yeah. If you can.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Sachs, your host for Lost Arts Radio. This is our show for Sunday night, 21st of May, 2017. Really glad to be here with you. We have an incredible show, and let me tell you what it's about, and then we'll get into it. If you've been following the stories, the articles that we've been posting on our site at lostartsradio.com, as well as stories on other sites talking about some of the similar issues, notably naturalnews.com from Mike Adams and his crew, and a lot of other great sites. They've been talking about this story about Azure Farms, owned by Azure Standard, one of the biggest distributors, if not the biggest distributor, of many of the organic foods that are available in America. And it's been under attack. One of their major growing areas, 2,000 acres, is in Sherman County, Oregon, and the county has decided that noxious weeds, the ones that they figure are dangerous to crops because they can spread and compete for the soil nutrients, those have to not just be controlled, they have to be eradicated. Which, there's no way to eradicate natural wild plants like that except to poison your land with some of the really nasty herbicides that are available, not just Roundup, but some others as well. So they decided that they would just make a rule, reinterpret the law about controlling noxious weeds in farms, and they'd say, well, now you have to eradicate them. That's what that means. And so we're going to come and forcibly poison your farm for your own protection, of course, against these terrible weeds. And then we're going to charge you for it, put a lien on the farm and make you pay for it and destroy your business as a side effect, but it's for your own good and the good of the county. So I thought, these are important stories, and Natural News and others are doing great jobs by covering these and getting massive public support stirred up. But we need to find out the rest of the story, what's really going on here, and we need to talk to the people in charge. So that was arranged, and incredibly enough, we got to talk directly with David Stelzer, the founder and CEO of Azure Farms and Azure Standard, the distributing company, as well as David Cross, the marketing marketing director, for Azure Standard. And you get to hear from both of them tonight. So without any further ado, as they say, let's go and have our talk with them and give you an inside view of what's really behind that story. I think you'll be interested. Okay, so the year is 1967. I'm in no, you're not in a time machine. This is on purpose. We're going back to a scene in a cabin on the side of a hill where I was a young university student a while back, and a man walks in to give us our first discussion. This is not an official university class. This was a garden, and the only light in the room was from a metal fireplace, and the whole place smelled very strongly from wood smoke. Really surreal environment. And the man who comes in is a well-known Shakespearean actor who's just come over from Britain, used to study with Rudolf Steiner in France and in England and Austria, and then came over to do a garden after giving up an aristocratic family, and he was a commander on a battleship in World War II, and really disgusted with what he had done with his upbringing and special privilege and wealth, and just dumped it all to go back and teach the lessons from organic gardening. And this was way before USDA took over the name organic. This was when it was really happening without their rules involved. And it was an amazing experience. And that was Lyndon Johnson was president, the Vietnam War was going on, and there was a company named Monsanto that you may have read about if you're not this old, but they were dumping tons and tons of one of their favorite products on the Vietnam jungle called Agent Orange. And this was an herbicide. And that's the same company that's operating now in partnership with our current government, involved in all kinds of interesting projects. So we got exposed with Alan Chadwick, who was the ex-British naval officer and Shakespearean actor, to a different level of learning and understanding and wisdom that made the university courses seem really superficial and knowledge without wisdom. And a lot of us got lost, many of my friends lost in drugs and off on sidetracks, but some of them put what they learned together to do something for the world, to really try to contribute what we learned from Alan and from other things ongoing. That was the beginning of my long time and ongoing study of holistic health and reversing aging and degenerative disease and things without drugs and immunity without vaccines and things like that I'm still deeply involved in, but I've never lost touch with organic agriculture. So that's a backdrop for tonight's discussion, which is one of the most important shows that we've done, and that is talking about those people that didn't get sidetracked but put together this deeper level of wisdom to contribute something to the outside world, which is desperately in need of it right now. And you may have heard one of my friends, Mike Adams, has been writing about a situation in Oregon where a farm that we're going to be learning about tonight is under attack. It's an organic farm, and it supplies a large amount of the organic food for the country, 38 states, if I understand correctly. And there's an interesting adventure coming online now, and that's getting closer to a conclusion, good or bad. And we need your help to make sure that the outcome is good. So sorry for the long lead in, but I wanted you to understand the importance of what we're going to be talking about. We have David Stelzer, the founder and CEO of Azure Standard and Azure Farms, with us, as well as David Cross, the marketing director for Azure Standard. And we're going to talk about the background of this situation. We're going to make it personal so that you feel like you're included and you're there with us, and we're going to jointly see what we can do about it. So thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it in the middle of your intense schedule, and especially with what's happening, but I think this is going to be well worth sharing with everybody. So thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Richard.
What I'd like to do to include everyone, I don't want to just talk to the people that know what's going on. I want to talk to new listeners and people who don't even really have a clear feeling of what organic is about, and go back to the beginning with each of you before you got involved in this, and show kind of what was the path that led to it, and why it's important, what led you to where you are now, and then we'll get into what's going on. Either one of you that wants to start.
All right. Well, organic farming for us is really deep. It's not very much later than what you were talking about. So my father actually started farming organically before it was a popular thing to do. So this was back in 1973. Mm-hmm. Back then, organic was fringe, a little bit like what you were talking about, the hippies or whatever that had already kind of turned their back on everything normal, and they were talking about organic gardens and things like that. But that's not really what motivated my father. He was, he was a conventional farmer, used all the junk that everybody else used at that time. And and so we ended up having some very interesting health issues, and he was also seeing that he was having to use more and more, especially of the herbicides and the nitrogen fertilizers that he was using. to get the same crop, he started, at 10 pounds, and then to 20 pounds, and then to 30 pounds, and it just took more and more to get the same result. So he looked at it, and and at the same time he had at that time they treated their wheat for a thing called smut, which, by the way, I've almost never seen ever. But they just did it. It was routine. You always treated your wheat for smut. It's a disease that makes the wheat black. So he was treating that with mercury. So, he's in the wheat, up to his armpits in mercury, and he ended up getting some pretty serious mercury poisoning. So he, said, hey, I'm done. I'm not going to put chemicals on my land. I'm not going to put chemicals, not going to use chemicals to destroy the health of my family. And, that's it. And this wasn't, this wasn't a garden. At that time, he was farming about 1,800 acres.
When was it that he switched over and decided no more chemical stuff?
1973. So this was only a few years after what you were talking about there in the late 60s. So and truthfully, I was still pretty young at that time. And, but, my health, I had been born very ill as well. So I was pretty motivated to change to a healthy lifestyle, to live a healthy lifestyle that they encouraged me, because, I didn't have a lot of buffer. In fact, all the doctors said I wasn't going to make it. That was their synopsis. So my parents, they changed their lifestyle, they changed their eating habits, everything went to a different way, and so changed our farming habits. So that was the last. They never used chemicals again. So we still farm that land. The original 1,800 acres is where headquarters is. We still farm that land organically to this day. It's beautiful land, too. A lot nicer land than it was back then, actually, because, it's got microbes living in the soil, and, biodiversity has come in. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's kind of in the foothills of Mount Hood on the east side.
Wow.
So over time, so my dad, he never was much of a marketer or seller. We were selling just directly on the commercial market for a while, and then he got a few contracts. We were selling to a couple of places that wanted the grain for organic. And we lost one of those key accounts because, pretty much he was selling everything to one spot. And we lost that account. So this was in the 80s. And so here we had, and we lost that account after we'd already planted. So here we had all this grain, a lot of rye and wheat and stuff coming on that didn't really know where to go with. So I was young and full of energy and not very smart yet at that time. And so I said, let me see if we can't take that out and sell that direct. So I started driving around to the little natural food stores and stuff and saying, hey, can you buy some wheat, some flour, some rye flour, these things. And some of them said yes. So that's kind of was the start of the marketing that we've been doing for the past, going on to almost 30 years now, 28 years or so. So
those original stores that bought from you, obviously there was no USDA ownership of the word organic, so I'm assuming you explained to them that all this grain was grown without chemical fertilizer or pesticide, right?
Absolutely. The interesting thing is that the term organic was very widely understood before the USDA got involved.
Right.
Now,
true.
I'm not saying it was quite as easy to market, because there were charlatans.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying there aren't still a few, but there were, people who didn't understand the term and said, "Oh, my stuff's organic too." Oh, but when it really wasn't, had nothing to do with it. But for the most part, especially in the natural foods world, people did understand the term and they knew what it meant. And it's pretty similar today, even though you couldn't go down and define, hey, you didn't use this, you did use that, or whatever. And it wasn't very long until there were certification agencies that were formed. So by the late 70s, we had private certification agencies formed that certified products organic. Right. Even though they were not regulated by the federal government, they were like, I guess, maybe more like a marketing group that created a certain amount of trust was built. And Oregon Tilth, that later became certified under the USDA, was one of those groups. They certified, we were certified by Oregon Tilth back in the late 70s and early 80s. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't very common for them to have big farms back then. There was mostly, most of the organic places were little vegetable farms that were kind of on the edge of town,
Right. So you just started on a real small scale and then it expanded from there, huh?
Well, as far as the distribution goes, yes. I mean, obviously we started farming 1,800 acres, so I don't know if that's, kind of small for this country, but not exactly small.
No, I meant the distribution, sorry, when you were driving around to the stores. And
I was driving around to the store. I mean, my first delivery vehicle was a Chevy Love pickup, so yeah, it was small.
Right.
And it grew from there, as the demand happened in 98 and 99. It went crazy. We had a lot of people storing up for Y2K stuff at that time. Mm-hmm. It was buying whole grains was a good idea, and we ended up selling a lot of whole grains during that time frame, and that really is kind of what grew us up. Our mailing list went from, just barely past friends and family to, tens of thousands during that time frame.
Well, a nice thing about the grains, too, is that if the world doesn't end on schedule, you can still use them because they last a long time if they're dry, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 10, 15 years later, it's still perfectly fine, yeah. Absolutely. There's no problem with, and that's what grains do. I mean, they found grains in the pyramids that were thousands of years old and were still viable.
Right.
So it is amazing, with the grains.
Yeah.
So, then we began to, realize that demand was there and begin to market the idea that, hey, there is. And that's pretty close to the same time that the USDA standards came in place. Mm-hmm, and so we began to market, hey, here's some real organic, some, if you want economical and great organic food, and we began to make deliveries, over a large portion of the country. Before that, it was pretty much, just along the West Coast.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm not sure exactly at what point. We're listening to David Stelzer right now, the owner and CEO of the farm and also the distribution company. And at the appropriate time, we should get David Cross, the marketing director, to come in and say how your background led into this too, David. So if you want to catch us up with that, that would be great.
Sure. It's funny that you mentioned Alan Chadwick, because my dad was in the Royal Navy in World War II at the same time that Alan Chadwick was in the Royal Navy in World War II. And I recall Alan Chadwick was on a minesweeper and my dad was on a motor torpedo boat, so they would probably have done very similar things.
Yeah, exactly. That's amazing. All this ties together.
It doesn't everything. So I grew up in northern England, and we had a small house. It was 950 square foot house, 3-bedroom house. It went directly onto the sidewalk. We had no yard. My dad was a plumber, and he had grown up in the countryside, and he found an old one of our neighbors about a few blocks away. She's very old, and she had this old pasture that she used to have her horse in it, and the horse had passed away, and this piece of land was fallow. Anyway, my dad was very good at making friends, and he ended up renting this piece of land from her. I recall it was about 100 by 30 feet.
Okay.
For about $1 a month.
Okay.
And so as a kid, I only remember this piece of land always being there. And then as a family, we turned this from a piece of fallow land into a functioning vegetable garden. And so as far back as I can remember, I had my hands in the soil. And then, we would grow those vegetables and fruits and things, and then we would bring them home, and then I would stand on a chair in the kitchen and help my mum make pickles and sauces and cook. And so my love of food and gardening are intertwined at such a deep emotional level. I couldn't separate it from who I am. I only remember that as one of my earliest memories, the smell of the earth and the smell of food and cooking and stuff. And so that's how I got into growing and producing my own food all those years ago in northern England. And, it was very useful because my dad had a stroke at 52, and we were still able to provide for our family, even though, he was not able to work from that point forward. We had at that point lost the allotment, but we still managed to grow some things in our backyard. And that's where my love of organic food came from. From my dad, I also remember when I was about 8, I'd asked him for some pocket money, and he said, "You want pocket money?" Very good. He said, "Meet me down here, 8 o'clock Saturday morning, and you'll get your pocket money." And so I met him in the kitchen dining room at 8 o'clock that Saturday morning on the dot. He says, "Right, come with me." So we got in the car, and I said, "Where are we going?" He says, "You're going to get your pocket money." So we went, and he was a plumber, as I mentioned, and he had, by this time, a small plumbing fixtures store. Anyway, we got there. He said, "I want you to put all that box of copper fittings there, I want you to organize them into these different boxes so that everything's in its right place." I said, "What about my pocket money?" And he said, "Well, you do." So basically, my first job was at 8 years old, working in my father's store, and that's how I learned to work for pocket money.
Wow,
and so, but from him, I learned all about selling and customer service, and we did advertising in a local newspaper in northern England, and that's how I learned about advertising and marketing. And so, those threads all came together from that point forward. And so those things I learned as a kid have followed me throughout my life and my career across the world, and it's been an amazing journey so far.
So when was that, and what happened between then and when you ran into David Stelzer and what he was doing?
Sure. I compressed time quite considerably there. So that was in the early 60s. You mentioned 1967, you met Alan Chadwick. Well, 1967, right. I was planting vegetables in northern England. Yes, as a little kid with my young sister. So I originally, when I left school, I left grade school. I did not go to high school. I did not go to university. I originally thought I wanted to be a chef. And so very briefly, I worked as a chef And increasingly, I found myself getting interested in natural health. I learned meditation at the time. I started becoming more interested in things like Ayurveda and natural health. I started volunteering for a local meditation center, and someone donated them a computer. I taught myself how to use it, and then I taught myself how to do fundraising, writing fundraising letters, which turns out it's very similar to writing any sort of sales letter. And then from that, then local businesses started to ask me if I could help them with their promotion and stuff. And that took me on a very interesting journey over the last 30 years in my career. Both, I think I mentioned in my bio to you there, I mean, I've done everything from being a guest presenter on QVC. I've done earthquake relief. I have done a lot of marketing all across the world for all kinds of different businesses. I ran an internet startup in Stockholm in Sweden in the 90s, which was great. It was the time where every internet project had lots of venture capital behind it, and many of the projects would actually have a budget line for a party at the end of the project, which was quite fun. And I've worked in 22 countries, and the United States is the sixth country I've lived in, and it's the first country I call home. And I've lived here since the last 15 years, and Oregon is absolutely the most wonderful place I've ever lived. About 10 years ago, we bought a small piece of land, 6 acres, just outside a little logging town called Estacada. And we've been growing our own food and rearing animals and having adventures with goats and chickens and you name it. And I also hunt and fish in Oregon. And then I was aware of Azure Standard and Azure Farm. I got my first catalog from them about 11 years ago. And I just had a little call from someone from Azure about a year ago, and they said they just needed a bit of help with their email marketing. And here I am now as the marketing director of Azure. So all those seeds that were planted over my life have all come to fruition, and it's a feeling of coming home for me on so many levels working with Azure. It really is.
It sounds like a perfect connection.
Absolutely.
So, David Stelzer, just to give some background to the current situation, I'm assuming that only one, if I understand you right, you have 2 major parcels that make up the farm. Is that right? The 2,000 acres and the 1,800 acres that was older? Is that correct?
Yeah, those are the 2 large ones. There's a few other smaller pieces that we also operate, but that's the big pieces. Okay,
and the 2 are in different counties. Is that true?
That is correct.
Okay, are they pretty widely separated from each other in miles?
Well, to drive from one farm to the other is just a little over 50 miles. 51 miles from my house to the edge of the other farm.
Now, just for the people that don't live in Oregon, since we're talking worldwide right now, people think of Oregon as wet and green. That's mostly the part west of the Cascades, right, where it rains all the time. And then
that's right.
A lot of the rest is high desert, if I remember correctly.
Right, and just desert too, kind of.
Okay.
And so over where David Cross lives is pretty wet and green most of the time. But over where this farm is, I mean, we're looking at, average rainfall between 9 and 10 inches a year.
Okay, really desert.
So it's almost desert, but you can still grow, small grains grow pretty well in that climate. And it does have beautiful soil on it. It's got beautiful volcanic loam, that's a lot of places 10 plus feet deep. It's gorgeous soil.
What's the elevation there?
At the Morrow Farm, it varies from about probably 1,600 to 2,100-ish.
Okay. But it's still pretty cold in the winter, I would imagine, right? You get snow.
Yeah, there's still a winter there. I mean, it's not horrible. Okay. But it's not winterless for sure.
So what has your interaction been in the two different places with the people in charge of the county government in each of those two places prior to now?
Well, for the most part, I've thought we've been, on pretty good terms there. Obviously, a little county like Sherman County, there's where this happened. There's only roughly, there's less than 2,000 people in the whole county, and we employ some 80 people in our operation there. So, for a county that's, for a town that size or a county that size, they've valued that number of jobs. I mean, it's kind of like,
Sure.
a little bit like, Nike for Portland or something,
Yeah, you guys are a big asset for the county. Before I forget, what's the name of the other county where this is not happening right now?
Well, the other county is Wasco County, which is just to the west of Sherman County.
And Wasco County is where the 1,800 acres is.
Well, yeah, we have a little bit more than that there now, but...
Okay. All right, so was there any kind of a lead up to the current situation with things gradually developing in this direction, or, was it just a total sudden surprise?
Well, so there has been lead up to a certain extent. It seems like every year we get somebody that complains to the county weed department that our place is too weedy. That,
Okay.
That, hey, we don't. And when you're doing organic farming, it's not like that you're, growing nothing but weeds, but there are weeds. It's not like you just burn them down, right?
Yeah, I think it would be also helpful, since people have been brainwashed by language, and most of them, I would guess, have never thought what weeds are. But, if we didn't, weeds are wild plants, and if we didn't have any, the world would look really different.
Absolutely. Yeah, weeds are just any plant that grows without being planted and cultivated is defined by nature as a weed. Now, a lot of those plants that, often don't grow don't need to be cultivated, cultivate out very easily. Mm-hmm. And that's partly why we cultivate ground, is to, break up the soil, kill the native vegetation, and put a monocrop of some sort in that, we can grow for a valuable food or fiber or whatever we're growing there. But there are some plants that are more pernicious as far as they don't cultivate out quite as easily as others.
Okay.
So those then they put in another classification called noxious weeds.
It almost sounds like they're calling them poisonous or something,
Yeah, they're not poisonous. They're not. There's nothing poisonous about them. In fact, a lot of noxious weeds actually have a lot of medicinal value.
Right.
But they're noxious in the sense that they don't die easily from common tillage practices or common herbicides.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they're tough in that sense.
Which is probably one of the reasons that soil still exists in the world, I would suspect, right?
Well, that's, speculatory, I suppose. I mean, a lot of the soil was originally covered with grasses and stuff that does cultivate out for, if you look at the Great American Prairies or, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. A lot of these plants, the interesting thing about it is some of these plants that we now call noxious weeds are not necessarily native to this particular soil. Right. They're non-native plants. They've been moved, to a different continent, and where they were native, they needed to be really tough because there were insects and diseases and competition for that same space that made them have to be very persistent to survive.
Okay.
Now they get over here, the disease, the insect, or whatever is not there, and they grow. Oh, wow! But yet they still have their persistent, rhizome type qualities.
Okay. So wild morning glory would be an example of that. Is that true?
And that is actually one of the weeds that they're after us about.
Okay.
Is wild morning glory.
Okay.
So people brought it over for a pretty flower in their yard, and it didn't, it got out of the yard,
mm-hmm.
and it spread to the garden or to the surrounding areas, and over the however many years it's been, they create these little flower gardens in the middle of a field where you don't necessarily really want it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what they're saying is that if that's using up any of the space, that it's costing money, and it makes me wonder if the people that occasionally have complained about this have been farmers or just people that drove by and thought of it for some reason.
No, it's primarily farmers. I don't think there's any. They're farmers that are in the general area, not necessarily our direct neighbors necessarily, mm-hmm. but farmers in the county. And in some ways, I think, because of what we do, it makes them, and I have been pretty vocal, and I think that's, a part of what's going on with this is, I've been vocal about the dangers of toxic chemicals like glyphosate. Mm-hmm. I've been vocal about the toxic nature of most wheats. Most wheat, and all this, and that's why we're getting all these allergies to wheat. That's why we're getting these autoimmune diseases that include, celiac disease and other things, is because of the way we're raising our wheat.
Yeah, it's just not the wheat, right? So you're pointing out the fact that spraying poison on your food and then eating it is not a brilliant plan.
That's it. That's my exact contention. Yes. And from more than one angle. I mean, you're putting poisons like, hydrocarbon chemicals in the form nitrogen in the form of, a petrochemical mm-hmm. on and anhydrous ammonia as mm-hmm. a form of nitrogen. And then you're only looking at one element. That's the growth regulator. So it makes the plant grow. Mm-hmm. But all the rest of the nutrients aren't there. And exactly. Guess what forms the first amino acid that forms in grain? The gluten. It's the only amino acid that can form with just nitrogen. Mm. So we get this huge out of balance in the grain once it's consumed. Not even to mention the glyphosate that they put on it and everything else, but just with that by itself.
Just the chemical fertilizer.
Just the chemical fertilizer. Our bodies need 72 minerals to be healthy and a host of amino acids. And when we're just getting one and the body's just trying to pull from other sources the rest to balance that out, eventually it says, I had enough. Can't take any more of this gluten, and it creates an autoimmune response. And then we call it celiac disease, and we diagnose it, and we tell people, well, you can't eat the staff of life anymore.
Yeah, you just have bad genetics or something. And what occurs to me is that what you've just described also applies to the plants. Because if you unbalance the delicate universe of microorganisms in the soil with chemical fertilizer, then the diseases and insects, which are not there by chance, but they have a purpose and a function, one of which seems to be elimination of the unfit plants, then that looks like you need pesticides. And the thing that made it look necessary was the fertilizer.
Yeah, that's very true. As soon as a plant is stressed, it seems to put out a signal that mm-hmm. says, I am food to a bug. And I could actually go into the technical details of how that works if your listeners might be interested. But it does. It creates a food source for the insects. The interesting thing is people and large mammals as well, actually pretty much all mammals, and, need the exact opposite kinds of sugars that bugs need in their food.
Yeah, this is a really well-designed system, is what you're pointing out. You can't just say, well, I only want this part of it and poison everything else and think that there's no repercussions.
Well, that's right. There's no repercussions. We end up with these autoimmune responses. We end up with diabetes. We end up with heart disease. We end up with all these things, cancers, although probably more from the poisons that they put on to try to control these things like weeds and insects. But we end up with all these things that everybody wonders, well, why do we have these autoimmune diseases? Why do we have, we've had ticks forever, and now we have Lyme's disease everywhere. Now we have all this celiac disease. We have this Crohn's disease, all these things that were unheard of.
And the response is, don't worry about the reason, just more drugs. It's very analogous to what's happening in agriculture. And like you said, they're totally tied together.
Well, agriculture is the first defense for human health. Now, I know that there's a lot of other factors involved with human health. There's emotional health. There's, spiritual health. There's, the way you think. There's a lot of other things. The body is a complex being. Mm-hmm. It's not a super simple being. However, the fuel that we feed our body is the very first thing. And it's also one of the easiest to correct.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and organic food just means regular food, which I think people have forgotten about that.
Well, it's real food without all the extra stuff. And ideally, even though USDA organic doesn't necessarily define that, but true organics also is nutrient dense. It's got the nutrients in it that the body needs for optimum health, because we're not pushing the crop with artificial nitrogen. Most farmers only look at 3 elements, N, P, and K. That's all that's that's all that's on the standard soil test that they use. The body needs, at least what we know about right now, we need 72 minerals for optimum health. Yeah. It's not about 3, it's about 72. And the only way...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, the only way the body can get those, or that a plant can uptake all 72 minerals, is through microbial action. So the microbes have to break down the soil and the particles that are in the soil to make those minerals absorbable. So really, a true organic farmer, his job is to create a wonderful, healthy environment for the bacteria, the protozoa, the nematodes, and all the mycorrhiza and so on to grow in, to create a very abundant flow of nutrients for the plant. And how do you do that? Those little critters all eat sugar too. That's their only energy source. Mm-hmm. What creates sugar? It's plants, right? Only plants and algae through photosynthesis can create sugar. It's the energy source for all life on Earth, including us. We want, not all sugars. We want the right kinds of sugars, but that's the energy source for all life.
Right.
And that's and including those. So in order to have a healthy microbial biology in the soil, you've got to have a healthy plant that actually exudes those sugars through its root system to feed those plants, or those bacteria, which then in turn feed all the minerals to the plant, so we actually get healthy food.
Right. It works really well. So, but the problem is, most of the farmers these days have been educated. And they've been educated by the system that's been funded and directed by the chemical companies. And the fact that the chemical fertilizers lead to the apparent need for pesticides is not really a problem according to that business model. it's exactly what needs to happen.
Well, in their viewpoint, from that worldview, is that the only thing that matters is a better yield.
Yeah.
It's not about quality. And so this little tiny weed could decrease their yield by some small percentage.
Yeah, probably does, right.
Right? Because it's taking it's creating some biodiversity in the soil. It's competing a little bit for the moisture that's there, and it's competing a little bit for the nitrogen that they're applying, because the weeds grow, it's the growth regulator for weeds too. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, if the weeds are, more nitrogen means bigger weeds as well. So they, so it begins to compete with their crop. And so there's some small decrease in yield. Mm-hmm. And that suddenly becomes of immense concern that's exceedingly beyond the concern for the health of their customer.
Yeah,
and that's the sad part.
Exactly. I don't think the connection is understood at all. So it's just a money game. How many pounds of crop can you produce at a certain price per pound, and that's really the entire issue.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, we have a government system that subsidizes that kind of farming.
Right.
So they do price supports, and they do all kinds of different programs to do that. So it's even harder to break out of that cycle because you're being subsidized to stay in it.
Well, I think even a lot of agricultural loans have the condition that you have to farm a certain way in order to get the loan, don't they?
That's a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but I believe so. There's what they call best farming practices, and I know that's true for the like price guarantees and the government subsidized loans and things like that. Yeah. Is that you have to use best practices. Those best practices, basically have to come from the land-grant university, whose money primarily comes from pharmaceutical and chemical companies.
Yeah,
surprise, what they recommend.
Right. So actually, if they can partner with government agencies, which is exactly what both medical and chemical industries are doing, then they can get laws passed to require what they do, just like what they call standard of care in medicine. If you guys are talking about natural healing practices, and if the recognized standard of care is chemotherapy, then, people are losing their kids now when they don't want to do that to them. So I think there's a general theme of these industries realizing government is a really good partner to have, because they just have to make a law that their approach is the only one that's acceptable.
That's, unfortunately, that's part of what's... but the interesting thing is the law that we're dealing with here actually doesn't say that. It just says that... Well, it does say best practices, but it doesn't say it just says that those particular weeds have to be controlled. So there's a loose definition of what constitutes control of those weeds.
Right. So machine cultivation is definitely being done for control, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that, definitely one of the things that is done to control the weeds.
Okay, and then you give the grain a head start at exactly the right time to plant it, so that the weeds have a hard time totally coming back and you get the wheat crop.
Well, noxious weeds, truthfully, are not... They're just in little tiny isolated patches for the most part. Mm-hmm. So we do have weeds that we're talking about that, yes, we do a lot of work to do that, but those are not what's called noxious weeds. Those are just regular weeds. Okay. Not that the neighbors don't like them anymore, but there's no law. You could grow those on purpose if you wanted to, without, there's no law against those.
So you mean they've named a certain list of weeds that's included in a higher standard of what you have to do with them?
Yes, they have. They have what's called the noxious weed list. So they have an A list and a B list, and then anything not on one of those lists are not considered to be a noxious weed. They're just a weed.
I see.
If anything that grows on its own is a weed, it could even be a volunteer crop. You get volunteer weed in a barley crop, that's considered to be a weed, as long, if it just came up by itself.
So what exactly does the law say that you have to do?
The law just says that we must take every reasonable effort to control noxious weeds to keep down their spread.
Okay.
And
all right. So that law hasn't been changed. They're just, something happened where they decided to interpret that differently, right?
Right. So we're getting, and I think if I put everything together, and, we had a meeting last night with the county that actually was pretty encouraging. I feel like the county government, partly they listened to 57,000 emails.
That helps,
I think that was the really big piece. Yeah. So now, they want to work with us, if you want to call it that, to work this thing out instead of ignoring, everything.
Right. Okay.
They're now say, oh yeah, we'll come to the table and get this all worked out. And hey, you don't really need to worry about all the weeds. Only two of the weeds we're really concerned about.
That's amazing. Has nothing to do with torches and pitchforks or anything. They just wanted to be nicer.
Well, yeah, really what they wanted to do is say, hey, you guys made a mountain out of a molehill by going to the world with this, right?
All we were going to do is destroy your farm. It's not a big deal,
Well, and some of the neighbors at that meeting expressed that exact thing. They said, why do you think it's a big deal? Just go out and spray like everybody else. And if you want to be organic, hey, once you kill all the weeds out, you can be organic in another 3 years.
Yeah, we'll be happy to redefine it for you anyway. It's not a...
And a lot of them say, well, spraying Milestone won't decertify your farm. Oh, like, what? It just completely shows how ignorant they are on those issues. And what Milestone, I mean, it's a horrible residual herbicide that they actually they sprayed Milestone on a pasture. This was a thing that happened in England, but they sprayed this whole pasture with Milestone for noxious weeds, and then they turned the cows out on it some weeks later after the label said it was clear to do that. Turned dairy cows out on this pasture. They ate it down. They then took the manure out of the barn, composted that manure, and applied it to a field that was growing cucumbers, and it killed all the cucumbers as they came through the soil.
Yeah, what I'm telling people right now who want to do organic gardening and farming is that manure is no longer safe to put on the soil unless it's from animals that are fed organically.
You've got to know where your manure comes from.
Yeah, you can't go to the garden center and get it in a plastic bag. It's probably GMO fed.
That's right. You really need to know. Kind of like knowing where your food comes from. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need to know where your manure comes from too, if you're going to apply that.
Manure is going to become a really valuable, a little bit scarce product, actually. Could be the basis of some businesses. But, you brought up something interesting. These names that they give to these poisons, the name is chosen to make it sound really wonderful. Everybody wants to achieve milestones. How could that be bad? So, do you want to tell people what Milestone actually is, or something about it?
Well, it's a herbicide it's a selective herbicide, very similar actually in nature to Agent Orange that they used back in the Vietnam War that you were talking about.
Yeah.
It's very, very similar in nature because that one also is what's called a selective herbicide. So it only kills plants that have a leaf. It doesn't kill grasses. So, and milestone is very similar, and its makeup is actually quite similar, except it's got an agent in it to make it persistent in the soil. So it's basically Agent Orange with a preservative, if you will.
Okay, all right, right. It's a more advanced form.
It's a more advanced form. So it'll stay in the soil for years, and it keeps, so they put it on this noxious weed patch, and, if new little noxious weeds try to come up, the residual piece from this herbicide continues to kill those weeds, or at least damage them as they're trying to come through the soil and not make it as easy to grow. And, and I told a little story about the dairy just to demonstrate how persistent that is in your soil. And the half-life is like 20 years. It's horrible. Wow.
Yeah, transferring through the manure is really amazing. So I guess it is a milestone for the poison companies.
And we hear, it's not used near as much as things like, Roundup, the glyphosates.
Yeah.
We hear a lot about those, and not that they're much safer, they're really not, but it's not a selective herbicide. It's, it's quite different in its nature. It actually blocks the uptake of certain minerals from the plant.
Right.
Primarily manganese. And so the plant actually dies of typically a fusarium wilt because the manganese is what fires the immune system of a plant.
Yeah, and it's got a really interesting action on the gut bacteria in people too. I mean, it's not entirely unrelated.
That's a whole different story, but yeah, it's very similar because it actually blocks the uptake of certain nutrients that are needed for the bacteria and the human digestive system as well.
Right. Okay.
Same thing.
And there was a third pesticide they thought would be good to use on your farm also, right? What was that?
There was, and I don't know much about that one, to tell you the truth. Okay. And they were only recommending it on one of the plants. And I did look it up, and it's another absolutely toxic one, but it's not one that, I'm an organic farmer since I was old enough to even farm.
Right.
So my actual knowledge of how to use herbicides is not very good.
Yeah, it's not one of your specialties. Okay.
I just know how dangerous some of those are, and how much better the food value of our crops are, and why that is.
Yeah. All right. So I think we kind of skipped over this. When did the people at the county decide that it would be a good idea to spray your farm with herbicides?
Well, that was just within the last few weeks. So they basically came together with us not present and said, "Oh, well, their plan isn't good enough. Their weed management plan isn't good enough. Yeah. It doesn't meet minimum general standards, and so they need to come up with a better plan, or else we need to recommend that the farm be quarantined if they can't destroy the weeds." Well, what is a little bit beyond what the law actually requires, but that was the exact wording they used, and they wrote letters to the state saying, not actually requesting a quarantine yet, but advising the state that they have a situation here that's probably going to call for a quarantine, where they need to completely rope off the farm and spray the whole farm. Wow. with these chemicals, not let anybody in or out. It's usually, quarantine is very seldom ever used for weeds. I mean, it's almost never happened. It's used for things like, when we had the mad cow disease came into some flocks of herds of cattle in the United States. That's what they did. They quarantined the farm, take all the cattle into a particular place, destroy them all, burn it, do whatever, spray down the farm, whatever.
So why did the county people have to communicate with the state? Is the state the enforcer?
The county doesn't actually have the authority to quarantine a farm.
Okay.
It's the law doesn't give the county that authority. It only gives the State Department of Agriculture the authority to do that.
And actually, quarantine includes forced spraying then, right? You're talking about that together, I assume.
Right. The quarantine would mean that it's quarantined so that nobody can go in or on or off, and they use the whatever methods needed to kill the noxious weeds that are on the farm.
Okay. So when did do you know when the county told the state that this might be necessary?
Yeah, it's been, I would have the exact date, but about 3 weeks ago now.
Okay. Now, if they're saying, well, just by coincidence, after we got 57,000 emails saying this is not a good idea, now we think we might just work it out with you. But they've already called the state. So is the state going to become another issue of wanting to enforce this regardless of what the county does?
I'm hoping not, because they didn't actually technically call for a quarantine. They just gave the state notice that they were planning to. Okay. So the way that I understand it, I did call some state officials to find out about that subject. Okay. Yeah, and they say they typically never take action unless the county actually calls for it or a state official actually calls for it, saying that they saw something. Well, no state official is going to see anything because there's very little there. Right. So I'm not really worried about that. It's this perception that these chemical farmers within the county have that it's about, because there's weeds on there, we're bad farmers.
Right,
and
exactly.
we're do bad practices.
David Cross, I don't want to leave you out because you've been involved in this whole thing, and I want to know what your experience of this thing since the county brought up this new plan, how that's affected you and what your response has been to it up to now.
Well, it certainly has decreased the number of phone calls and emails I'm getting on a daily basis since they've approved this plan. I think that as far as I'm concerned, I was involved in getting this message out to the internet, to the viral sphere, as we could call it.
Yeah,
and that was pretty successful. I've run a number of marketing and PR and viral campaigns in the past, and this was without doubt the most effective.
Good.
And I think the reason for that is that this is not really about a few, and I do stress a few, weeds in a field in a small town in Oregon. This is really about, it goes to the roots of our food system and the fight between the organic and the non-organic movements. And, I've seen comments from people who spray their land and who farm using GMO soy and other GMO corn, and they think it's okay to do that. It's rather like you mentioned vaccination earlier in your discussion. It's really like the vaccination versus the anti-vaccination debate and stuff. We go and quarantine a field. We think that a weed-free field is the way that a field should look. We think that a child who is pumped full of repugnant drugs at birth is a healthy immune system. I think it goes down to a much deeper level than that. So what I'm seeing is, there's still great polarization between the two sides of the debate. But, one of the great things about our company, Azure Standard, is that we're still very much independent. You've probably seen that chart that's put out by the Cornucopia Institute of the organic companies have all been consumed by larger conglomerates and cocoa.
It's like the seed companies, are all being bought up by these big biotech companies.
Right, and then companies like Monsanto go and sue the Indian wheat farmers because they've been saving the seeds for years and they now claim patent infringement, etc. We're all aware of those stories. Yeah, so, for us, this was twofold. One was that we needed to get the message out about this absolutely heinous reinterpretation that control suddenly meant eradication. That was our immediate need. But I think that the deeper message is just that. It's about what we put on our food and in our food, and what we consider to be healthy soil and nutritious, healthy environments. And, the movement of the organic movement is still, I think, where agriculture has to head. Otherwise, we're going to destroy our world. I mean, I saw a video the other day someone sent me of Morgan Freeman, who is a very keen beekeeper, and he was making a very powerful analogy between, bees are being killed due to spraying with herbicides and pesticides.
Right.
And he felt that bees are rather like the canary in the coal mine. You put a canary in a cage, right? And so those are the barometers of what we're doing to our environment. And so although our fight on this particular issue is more or less resolved, the deeper fight is still there, and that is what David's talked about, the healthy land, the healthy soil, and what we are feeding our children and what we're doing to the world. That's what it really goes down to.
Well, when you see it as even not just an example, but perhaps a test case, because these same industrial interests and government interests could try to wipe out the major organic farms all over the country using the same strategy if this one worked. But this is mostly, what's going to happen when it's tried, and I think it's being watched very carefully. And it makes me wonder if either of you have a feeling of what inspired the county people to change the definition of acceptable control.
I've had a lot of contact with people who've been in touch about, the conspiratorial aspects of this, and that really, Monsanto has been financing this, and you could follow a money trail and find out. Our business is farming healthy organic food for our customers.
Right.
It's possible in a small county in rural Oregon that enough pressure was put by local farmers on the people who they elected, and maybe there's a re-election coming up, and maybe two guys were sat down having a cup of coffee at a kitchen table or a beer at a bar one night, and someone made a complaint. I think David mentioned in a video that he did the other day that neighbors don't do that. If someone has a problem, they call up the neighbor, they ask them to come around, and they fix the problem. If our few weeds were truly causing a problem for one of our neighbors, we would have absolutely worked with them to fix that problem. But what happened instead is that people went straight to the official body and push that official body to take action, and who knows what the backstory is. Mm-hmm. But, for us, the real message here is that we won't be shoved around. The grassroots movement of people who care about what goes in their food and what goes on the land and how it affects the groundwater, etc. That, when push comes, I would have preferred that we didn't have to take this route. I would have preferred that the hardworking staff at the Sherman County Courthouse didn't get 57,000 emails and however many thousand phone calls. Mm-hmm. But the organic movement is strong, and we have immense support. And, we took up the fight, and I'm glad we did. And I'm excited to see how this, because, we've had emails and phone calls from people as far afield as New Zealand and Australia. This message has spread, and it shows that people are concerned about the underlying concerns about who's involved, who's pulling whose strings, and it's not something that we will be pursuing personally, because I said we're farmers and that's our business. But sure, it's frightening to think where all these tendrils may go back to. Absolutely.
Yeah, the same thing, exact issues are happening in New Zealand and Australia and all over the place too. But David Cross, you mentioned that it's kind of resolved at this point. What's the current status, and what do you think about the situation as it is now? What's going to happen?
Well, to speak to our side of the discussion and agreement, we should work with the county to make sure that as a neighbour we comply with the law as it's written, not as it's reinterpreted. Mm-hmm. Our commitment is to produce healthy organic food, and we've had letters during this whole debate from, for example, independent wheat buyers who buy wheat from our farm on an ongoing basis. And again, as early as last December, congratulating us once again, quote unquote, for the high quality of the wheat. They have this stuff tested. And so, from our perspective, it's as much about keeping the message clear. There was a lot of misinformation spread by the other side of the debate. There were images posted on Facebook. Quite funny. There was an image posted with a field with wheat that was littered with weeds. Well, it turns out that the image that was posted wasn't our land. It didn't even border our property directly.
Were there people being sucked down into the ground by the morning glories and stuff like that?
I think so. There were many weeds that sprouted during this whole debate. And that's what happens, with social media is, I think to speak of another formal British military leader or leader, Winston Churchill, he said that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets a chance to put its pants on. And, that's what happened with this. There was an explosion of discussion, and there was an explosion of misinformation. And, the way that the other side had portrayed this at times, you would think that you couldn't even drive down the street in our neighboring town in Morrow without running into clogs of weeds.
Yeah, causing car accidents.
Right, exactly. So there was a lot of misinformation being spread, a lot of hearsay, a lot of panic from the side who felt that they should spray our land. And I think there was a lot of disappointment in in a certain faction on the other side who they didn't just want the weeds gone. They actually definitely wanted us to spray our land and practice their poisonous forms of agriculture on our land. I definitely got that sense.
Yeah, come into the modern age of science and become a chemical farmer.
Right, sure. You mentioned vaccination. I personally have made a choice not to vaccinate my children.
Well, you're just the kind of person that would let weeds loose on the world, then. I can totally understand.
Well, sure. But, the argument from the vaccination lobby is that, well, we don't, if there's an outbreak of measles, we don't want your unvaccinated children to come to school at that time because it will affect the kids who have been vaccinated. But that's a very silly argument because surely the purpose of getting the kids vaccinated in the first place is to create immunity. Well, why would you not want the unvaccinated? It goes back to that. So the idea here of...
It's almost exactly the same as farming, isn't it?
It kind of is in a way, yeah. And, we're a responsible neighbor. If we truly are causing an issue for our neighbors, we don't want that. We want to work with them, and we are open to working with them, but we will not violate the land, and we will not allow trespass on our land to create that poisoning of an organic food source. And so, we stood up and fought, and we got a much better outcome than we were looking at a couple of weeks ago.
So what's their attitude right now? What are they saying they're going to do?
Well, I haven't yet seen one of the local farmers rent their own plane and spray our field. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that that there is a spirit of contrition, and that they're looking for us to follow through with the Weed Control Board and to bring things under a level of control. I would say that there's still a faction of people who think that the Weed Board bowled over and that they should have just made us spray the land. Certainly when the county commissioners come up for re-election, my concern will be there as to, the promises that will be made and such. I think that there is definitely a lot of interest renewed in how an organic approach to agriculture could be adopted. I think that's a discussion that's come up.
That's good. That's a good effect. Now, you mentioned the weed board. What's a weed board? You have one of those in your county that makes decisions about weeds?
There is.
I haven't heard of one of those before, so maybe you can explain it.
Well, the weed board is just so people that are hired by the county to control weeds in the county. So there's one, and truthfully, the head of the weed department, weed board guy seems to be a reasonable guy. He was probably the levelest head in the whole meetings,
Okay.
He's like, yeah. And, he's not, he wasn't one of the local farmers. He's a college-educated man. He's got a degree in a biology degree that, and I think he understands that there's more than one way to skin the cat when you're dealing with weeds. It's not, one size fits all.
Okay.
But yet he's under a lot of pressure from the neighboring farmers to, hey, and and the threat, I think, is more than just there's weeds in the field. This kind of passion would not exist for that reason. I mean, it's not the kind of passion that you would see. It's a deeper lying issue. They don't. I think it's like they feel maybe that they need to spend a bunch of time justifying their own use of all these toxic chemicals.
How is the passion that you're talking about being expressed? How are you seeing it? What's happening?
Well, I mean, I saw a lot of it last night when they had at the public meeting when the county commission made this decision that they were going to let us basically work this out with the weed board. And some of the local farmers or local people, I don't know, follow more farmers. Mm-hmm. But I think, local farmers for the most part were just, you can't do this. You got to make them spray because this is just, this is what we do in this county.
Right. It threatens the whole understanding of life.
It's a completely different worldview. And to them, to me, from my worldview, I have a hard time understanding theirs. To me, that field that's, every edge is just bare dirt and dead grass and dead stuff. And in their field is nothing but this sickly blue-green wheat and not a single other plant of any sort.
Yeah.
That looks horrible to me. To me, that's completely against my worldview. In my worldview, that's garbage. I mean,
some of them are spraying the wheat to desiccate it and make it easier to harvest too, aren't they?
Well, that happens a lot up in the northern tiers, not in this county. They typically don't do that. Not because they wouldn't if it made any difference, but it's just, it's just wasted money because the wheat harvests early enough that they don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
Because we're, lower elevation.
Right.
And, a little bit further south. Mm-hmm. So they don't typically do that in this particular county, but they certainly, spray it for every other.
Right.
Every other possible thing. And most of those fields, that is exactly how they look. They look like absolute barren earth. Yeah. And then even in between, they'll fallow their ground and they won't cultivate it. They'll just keep spraying it all summer long.
What's really strange is that nobody notices anything wrong with that picture. I mean, the people who work in it anyway.
Well, apparently they don't. To them, that's normal. To me, that just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
But if I look at it from their side, maybe that's beautiful to them, and seeing a few weeds breaks their heart.
The ideal from the new version of science is that if you sterilize the world, it's going to be perfect.
Well, I think that piece of science isn't that like dying from the 70s? Wasn't that kind of the worldview, in the 70s and early 80s? And now we realize that there's things like probiotics.
Well, I think it's a division. There are some people that are realizing about things like probiotics, which are representative of everything that you're talking about in the soil. But that's, it's not being taught as the mainstream science still. I mean, because I'm in touch with that. In the health and medical fields, it's still, kill the germs. And the germs and the bugs and the plant diseases cause all the problems. And they don't do it for a reason. They just do it because it's bad luck or bad genetics or something like that.
Yeah, so you get sick just because you happen to be unlucky.
Yeah, or because bugs are just a mistake of nature, and, you just have to keep killing as much as you can. Otherwise, nobody will be able to eat food. I think that idea is still there.
Well, yeah, I guess it obviously is in this particular rural community, at least amongst a pretty big chunk of the landowners, at least on the agricultural side. And there was some people that talked about health at that meeting, and that this nurse stood up and say, "That's all alternative stuff. You can't. That all has to be discounted. You can't count on. I mean, none of that is normal science.
It's anti-science." Yeah.
So that it was interesting, but yet, I'm hearing all the time about doctors that are prescribing, MDs that are prescribing things like probiotics now.
Yes,
telling
and
people.
Not all of them have lost their licenses yet either, which is really good. Yeah, it's all the same theme moving through the agriculture and the health issues and everything. It's will the natural ability to see the wisdom of the natural approach be able to spread? And I hope it will. I think it would transform everything.
Well, it's definitely growing. Organic agriculture is growing in double digits and has been for, over 10 years, which is amazing. And actually, alternative health hasn't been very far behind it. Naturopaths, now a lot of insurance companies are actually paying for naturopaths, which they wouldn't absolutely, and chiropractors, which they absolutely wouldn't a few years ago. I think that we've seen, big strides there too. It's now not weird to go get acupuncture or something like that. That used to be like almost cultish to do, and now.
Well, and there are some brilliant. You mentioned nurses, and there's some really wise nurses and doctors and scientists that have been able to see through the conventional paradigm of all this stuff and realize, it's completely crazy, and knowledge that has no wisdom component to it is extremely destructive and actually threatens the whole biosphere right now. So it's kind of important that people get more waked up right away.
Yeah.
But I would say, all right, with the new situation with the county where they're suggesting that they would work with you, are they being specific enough so that there's some security in that at this point, or is it just a good possibility?
Well, I truthfully think that the county commission wants to make this kind of go away, if you will. Mm-hmm. It's obviously a political hot button, and they would just as soon see it go away.
Okay.
So, and the weed department so they basically referred it back to the weed department, and they said, hey, weed department, basically we're not reinterpreting the statute. It is as it's written, which is just to control the weeds. It was funny when they were first reading the purpose of the meeting, the county commission actually corrected the announcer to tell, "Oh no, we don't mean eradication anymore."
Right. It's just a misunderstanding.
That was just a slip of the tongue here, because that's what they've been talking about all this time.
We never really meant that.
We never really meant that. We just mean control. So they basically instructed the weed department, "Hey, work it out. Look at their weed plan. If you need to, if you don't feel like you should accept it as is, go ahead and consult with at least 2 agronom scientists from Oregon State University, and they've already accepted one who is a very strong advocate of organic farming as one of the university people."
Okay.
And so now they're identifying a second one. We're supposed to meet with the weed board, and the university people, and they're supposed to go over the weed plan. And if the weed plan, if there's some reason that the weed board doesn't feel, right now he says he basically told the commission he doesn't feel qualified to really judge a weed plan that doesn't include herbicides because that's all he's trained in. But he does know that there's other options.
Well, that was honest. I think that's great.
So now they're bringing some university people in to help him to make that decision. Okay. So to me, and I know one of them at least that they've already accepted is, he's a advocate. He's a believer, I guess, if you will, or at least close to. He believes in organic farming. He thinks it's a viable option.
Oh, that's wonderful. So they should maybe if they get somebody else who also knows about organic farming, that would be a really good sign for how it'll go.
And that's kind of what we told them is, hey, if you know all about chemical stuff, you really need a university person that does know a little bit about natural farming. And they kind of, the weed guy actually agreed to that. Yeah, he says, yeah.
Okay, good.
So, I'm hopeful. I can't say it's a done deal yet. And basically we have, between the meeting and all that, we have to June 7th, I think, is what they gave before the commission will hear about it again.
Okay.
To get all the details worked out, and if both sides sign off on it, then the county commission says they'll sign off on it.
Okay, so that's really hopeful. At this point, what do you want from people who support what you're doing? What would you like them to do, if anything, or any suggestions for them from either one of you in any direction? I mean, not just emails, but whatever you'd like them to do.
Well, as far as the county itself, I don't think that, that there's anything, I don't think they need any more emails. I think the point was well driven home as far as that part goes.
Okay, good.
Support organic agriculture, eat healthy food for right now, and, keep in touch and pay attention. The organic farms that are threatened today, now that we've been through this and we put it out there publicly, we found out we're not the only one.
Good.
So
now, as far as the future of the organic farming movement in the U.S. and elsewhere, the fact that USDA has kind of taken over the decision of what's organic, just like the county is telling you what has to be done for weeds, what is the issue with USDA, redefining organic so that it gradually gets diluted and becomes just a fancy kind of chemical farming? Is that, in your mind, an actual issue to watch out for? And if so, what needs to be done for that?
I can't say that I'm really seeing definite signs that that's happening.
Okay.
There have been some serious lobbying, especially on the dairy industry side. Mm-hmm. And so far, the people, and again, this is the people doing this, but when that happens, there's 100,000 emails to the USDA or more saying, don't do it. And so far, they've been listening. So as long as we pay attention, and because their heart and soul's not in it, but there was a proposal not too long ago about these dairy cows. They shouldn't have to, be on pasture. We should be able to do factory organic milk.
Mm-hmm.
And the people said no, absolutely no. And the USDA, after all the feedback and stuff and all the million emails and all the stuff they waded through, they actually came back with a little bit stronger rules than they had before.
Wow.
So they're actually, they're actually better. They're more strict than they were before. So now, instead of just saying they eat some pasture, you have to show that they actually had access to pasture for, I think, 120 days out of the year.
Okay, good.
And
So interestingly, it seems like USDA then is supporting both sides of the issue, right? Because they very quickly authorized GMO alfalfa to be spread everywhere, and they're supporting chemical agriculture at the same time as the growing organic movement.
So the way that they
see what happens.
The way the Department of Agriculture views it is a marketing label. So they view it as a niche marketing label. They support other niche marketing labels like cruelty-free or fair trade or things like that.
I see. Okay.
So they view it as a marketing label. So the way their viewpoint on it right now is that whatever rules make the label more effective to increase revenue in that segment is what they want to do.
Okay. So there's basically, at this point, no value judgment about anything that organic really means. It's just that this is a different marketing approach.
Yeah, it's a label. It's a marketing label, and that is exactly the way that they treat it. So if the people say they want the cows on pasture that have that label, they say, fine, cows will be on pasture that have that label. Because that's what you're willing to pay for, that's what'll happen. And so then they pass the law that says cows need to be on pasture. You know.
Okay. So if people,
I think it's another differentiation as well. That the organic label is a marketing thing as regards the USDA, but and there's always been an argument that nutritionally organic carrots are the same as non-organic carrots, right? But it's very interesting that in the United States, we do not publish the data on things like total pesticide residue. Because if you started to do things like total pesticide residue on organic versus non-organic, you then start to create a very clear differentiation between the quality of the food that you're putting into your kids' mouths. And that's something that they do in Europe, and certainly the word organic and biologique in Europe means more than just a marketing label. So I think that, again, this is how things like the USDA, the FDA control the positioning of the message so that the moment it is superficially only means the marketing. And, it's interesting that we suppress things like total pesticide residue, because if we did put that in place, then organic suddenly means a lot more than just a way of marketing a food to an elite band of consumers.
Right, and of course, suppression of that information is not being done by we. So who is actually doing that?
Well, that goes back to the roots of what you discussed earlier about who's pulling the strings of the county commissioners in Sherman County. But certainly, it's like retailers who did not want to have things like GMO on labels. They pressed heavily against the inclusion of that kind of data. Yeah. And it's because they're whenever you find this reticence to do something that is basically freedom of information, you'll always find a fraternity of companies or individuals who would be hurt in some way economically by the inclusion of these data. And so I think you're going to find that, people who have a vested interest in continuing to promulgate traditional poisonous agricultural practices have got their they are frightened of what this kind of information would do to their own businesses. I think that's what's happening.
Might not be good for sales. So if one of the things that both of you are saying your followers need to do, the people that want to support the whole idea, is to support organic agriculture, how do they stay up to date of what USDA is doing with organic and important issues that need to be addressed in this whole field? Because they're not in the mainstream news. So how do they follow those things?
Sure. So, I would say stay in touch with us, Azure Standard. Go to Azure Standard and sign up for our newsletter. We have a blog called Healthy Living. If you go to azurestandard.com and you look at Healthy Living, and then you can sign up for the newsletter there. There are great organizations. Certainly in Europe and in England, we have the Soil Association. In the States, we've got the Cornucopia organization. the thing is with, for many years I was a vegetarian, and I always said to myself, if I was ever going to eat meat or fish again, I had to be prepared to hunt it, fish it, or farm it. And so I do that.
Okay.
And to me, it's about taking a conscious choice in where your food comes from. There's a decision that one makes when one decides to choose organic over inorganic. And so I think that getting the message out to your friends and family that organic doesn't just mean that it looks better, because let's face it, organic vegetables and heirloom stuff sometimes looks much more ugly than certain types of vegetables and stuff. But it's more than just about the taste or the nutritional content. It's about what we do when we farm it, what we do to the environment. And so, becoming a spokesperson, an advocate, and an evangelical organic spokesperson with your friends and family is a very good thing to do. You can connect to local CSAs. You could order from Azure and become part of our community drops. You mentioned earlier we've got an organic farm, but we are also the largest independent distributor of organic non-GMO food in the United States today. We deliver to 38 states through our own shipping and trucking network. We have local community drops where we deliver across the country. And by becoming a member of those community drops and have your food delivered via Azure Standard, you're joining a network of people in your local community who share and hold similar values to you. And, I often hear from members of our community drops across the US that, they've connected with local people, and then they're able to do things like share produce from their own garden, or local sources of honey, or folk who like raw milk, etc., can make these local connections. And so, the whole thing about the organic movement is it's not just about the food, it's about the environment, it's about the community, it's about neighbors connecting who share these similar beliefs. And it's that kind of thing that resulted in such a viral increase in this message going out in the last week through a grassroots movement, or a wheat roots movement. Of course, wheat is a type of grass, so it's a grassroots movement that caused that message to go out. Get connected, be informed, and stay connected is how any grassroots organization gets its message out, and become part of that organic movement. It's a movement of consciousness. That's what organic movement is about.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the best way to describe it. David Stelzer, too, let us know what you would like people to come away remembering, and what they need to take from this whole experience that's important, and what their role is in the whole thing.
Well, the main thing that we really need to remember about this is that it's not about a label. It's not about any of that. It's about actually the nutrition content in the food. And it really, really does make a difference. There's a huge difference in the way that food comes together, the way that it grows, the nutrients that an organic farmer gives to the plant and the soil. So it bears a direct relationship with us when we put that kind of fuel in our body. Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing that I would say would be a takeaway on this, is that this is a major worldview point. There's two different worldviews here that maybe are slightly colliding, but one worldview is that it doesn't matter, that chemicals will take care of everything. When we get sick from the chemicals we put on our food, we put more chemicals in our body called drugs to counteract the sickness that we get, and we live in a constant state of chemical. Or the other side is, let's live in a natural, free environment. Let's get rid of the drugs out of our body. Let's get rid of the chemicals out of our body. Let's eat food that's grown in pristine soil that has none of that in it, that has all 72 minerals in it. Let's exercise in good, clean, fresh air. Let's have a healthy viewpoint and a healthy lifestyle, and we won't ever need to use those more chemicals, because we will live 100+ years in a healthy and vibrant lifestyle and state. Organic food is one of the foundational pieces of that. It's healthy food from healthy soil creates a healthy body. And that's the big takeaway with this.
Yeah, I completely agree. Whatever effort it takes to learn habits that go back to our normal state, I'm at this point totally convinced that we can stay in great condition for the entire lifetime. That's normal. All of these degenerative diseases that are being blamed on genetics and other things like that are not normal, and they're avoidable, reversible. And it seems to me that you guys have one of the primary examples of a health facility as it really should be. Not a hospital, although those may be needed in emergencies, but for the most part, the health facilities need to be the farms and the schools.
I couldn't agree more. That is where that's where the bottom line is.
Yeah. Farming used to be a really wonderful, healthy profession before World War II, and I know they still used some mercury and other things like that on the crops, but compared to now, it was a lot more like being in nature. And now on the conventional farms, it's one of the more dangerous kinds of work that you can do, and that needs to change back, it seems to me.
I was on a show a couple of days ago, and they actually had some people calling in, and somebody said, well, we couldn't possibly, said back before we had fertilizers and chemicals and stuff, every farmer had to feed, only could feed 37 people. And today, and then in the 70s, it was like 80 people, and now it's like almost 200. And if we had to actually go back to organic methods, that wouldn't be possible. And I just couldn't help myself but to say, what is wrong with healthy organic farm jobs? Is there any reason we can't add twice as many farmers?
If you get everybody eating cardboard, maybe one farmer could feed 1 million people if it's just like a capsule of something out of a factory.
Maybe. But are we really that void of people? We don't have any jobs that can be, and yet the politicians are always calling about creating jobs.
Right.
What's a better job than to work on an organic farm to supply people quality food?
I think in the earlier parts of this country's history, most of the people had their own farms and businesses, and that wasn't such a bad thing.
I don't think it's a bad thing to this day. Yeah. It's maybe more difficult because of the worldview that we have, that this farm has to be poisoned and, not have a weed on it, and, and has to, one farmer has to handle 200 and some people, the food supply for several hundred people. That's the worldview that makes it difficult for a small farmer.
That's defined as progress for some reason.
Small farm lifestyle is still a wonderful lifestyle on a small organic farm. I know some people, I know families that live on small organic farms. I mean, we live, of course, on an organic farm. I don't know if you'd call it small, but, we have to employ other people to help. Mm-hmm. But it's still a wonderful lifestyle.
Well,
I wake up in the morning. It's
incredible. It's like what I would call normal. And since you bring it up, I think a really important question before we end this is, in order to have what you're talking about spread, we don't just need consumers. We need a new generation of people of all ages, especially young ones, actually wanting to start small organic farms. I mean, don't we need to do something to encourage that? Because all the kids in school are being taught that work is terrible and that what you're after is to never have to do anything and just order everybody else to do the work.
It is sad that that's the general philosophy that's pervading. But I tell you, the real holdup, I believe there's a lot of young people that want to have organic farms, but the economic investment of that, it makes it almost impossible. It's very, very hard to go to a bank and make an organic farm pencil.
Yeah.
You may not be able to do it.
All right, so we need to solve that issue, because it's not just whether it's going to work out with the bank. It's that it seems to me that it's necessary for the planet and for human sanity.
Yeah, I agree. And so maybe we need an alternative banking system just for organic farmers.
I think something like that, yeah, because just to say that it's impossible, I don't think that's going to work, because it's not an optional thing. It's like one of the basic elements of life. And I think we need to get it back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I understand that Whole Foods did put a little bit of a program in place for doing that, but it seems to be almost all for third world countries, small farms and overseas. But
Whole Foods is still selling fresh GMO corn in their produce department.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'd like to see those kind of ideas spread. If maybe in the future, if we stay in touch over time, it's going to depend on us to think of how to change those roadblocks and eliminate them.
I agree.
Right.
I think once through education as well.
Yeah, the educational system could go a long way to doing that, because if people were taught in school that this is the desirable way to grow food, then I think there'd be a lot of pressure for the economic system to make it possible. So,
right now, yeah, and Azure would love to be a part of that. I can tell you that right now. We would love to help work with young organic farmers. And
all right. Well, yeah, let's stay in touch, because I think good ideas can be profitable for everybody on all levels, money included, but not just money. Also, like you said, all these different levels that organic lifestyle feeds people on. It's not just physical. And let's try to think of how to make that go to the next step.
Awesome.
So, before we end here, is there anything else that you guys, that I cut you off or you didn't get to say, or that you'd like to mention to people before we go?
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to share. We love this community.
Yeah, I totally agree. And once more, the website and any other contact points that you want to give to people to stay in touch.
Sure. David, please.
Yeah, so the Azure website is www.azurestandard.com. That's AZURESTANDARD.com.
Okay.
And then for those that would rather pick up the phone, it's 971-200-8350.
Okay. Sounds great. So I tremendously appreciate having you guys on, and I want to introduce everybody to the farm like it's part of their own family. So let's see what we can do with that, and hold on, and we'll say goodbye in the break here just a second. Okay, that was David Stelzer, founder and CEO of Azure Standard, and also David Cross, the marketing director of Azure Standard. Now you know a little bit more about the inside story of what's been going on with the farm. Apparently, they don't need millions more emails. That's already been taken care of at this point. So they just want your support. They want you to support organic farming. Go to their site at www.azurestandard.com, AZURESTANDARD.com, azurestandard.com. Follow their work. the updates on what's happening with the county, which hopefully is going to be okay at this point. We just have to keep an eye on it. And definitely support agriculture, organic agriculture, which is a major element in the natural healing of the whole biosphere. So their message is really a lot like mine, like what we've been talking about on Lost Arts Radio. Learn. That's what it comes down to. Don't just learn academically and intellectually, but learn what you can about healing yourself and apply it to yourself in your own life. And that by itself will affect everybody else. And I know people don't think that you're going to have an effect on others unless you go out and start telling them what to do, but that's not really the case. Your most powerful effect on others is by what you are. So I totally agree with both Davids, and I recommend absorbing everything you can about natural healing, organic lifestyle and farming and growing food, doing it yourself if you can, encouraging people in that area. And I think that this is really the great hidden key at this late stage if we still want to have a chance to heal the earth and prevent where it looks like things are going, with incidents like this. Heal yourself first and then see what happens. Encourage others in the same direction just by what you do more than by what you say. Then, if you want to share your experience with us in this whole process on the forum, those of you who have been there before, it's on lostartsradio.com for talking about sharing experiences about all these things. And then on the Saturday show also, we have a Saturday discussion show in addition to this Sunday night main show. Saturday show is on the same time, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, U.S. time. And I usually talk about whatever's going on that I want to go over with you, and then we'll take some calls. If you want to just, a lot of our audience is in other parts of the world, and maybe they don't have time to come listen to the show at exactly the time that it's on, but you can email questions and subjects that you'd like covered on Saturday, and I'll definitely address those if you'd like. And then when you hear the archive, at a convenient time for you, we'll be talking about the topics that you've chosen. If you want to help keep us going, donate. Most of this stuff we're doing doesn't generate any money. And there's a donate button on both of our sites. That's lostartsradio.com. And the site with the school that we'd like to develop that I was talking to the Davids about today, which is lostartsresearchinstitute.org. lostartsresearchinstitute.org. Let me know what you think about the school ideas. And the main thing, as we were talking about tonight, if you really want to contribute to a better future for everybody, in addition to strategic emails when they're needed, like the 57,000 that went and changed the county's mind, and so they said, well, it's just a misunderstanding. We never really meant that, of course. In addition to those things at the right times, learn and heal yourself. And it affects everybody else. It leads to everything else that you're interested in. Do that first, I would recommend. That's what I'm working on along with you at the same time, and what we talk about on Saturdays as well. And I wish you total success in all parts of your life, and that you'll share that with us, and have a great week. I'll meet you here next Saturday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. Talk to you then, and have a great week.
Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All new shows and archives are available at blogtalkradio.com/Lost Arts Radio. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lost Arts Radio. We're on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. Again, youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. And scene.life, we're at Lost Arts Radio/profile. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab or right from the button on our Facebook page. You're also invited to join our free user forum on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can ask Richard a question there or post about any subject that you're interested in. Our forum is growing and we'd love to have you be part of that community. We keep it troll-free, so don't worry about others, paid or otherwise, speaking negatively or engaging in some sort of debunking tactic fakery. I closely monitor the forum for abuse, and we have a very strict one strike and you're out policy, which is why we require you to register your email address along with whatever screen name or username you want to use. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks to help keep us on the air. We spend many, many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. You can also find me on Facebook, scene.life, and gab.ai at Diamondisc, DIAMONDISC. My short new video blog or vlog is The Diamond Report, and that can also be found at www.thediamond.report. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.
What's it gonna take? Ooh, what's it gonna take? Ooh, it was just about to get easy and I walked away. So what's it gonna take to learn to love? Tell me what's it gonna take to bring me back home? Tell me what's it gonna take to walk that phone down the road? It's just about to get easy and I walked away. So what's it gonna take to learn to love, bare my soul again? See how when you hold me, how gently I unfold. See how you can really just open me wide. See how my heart shatters, how easy it is to break. Careful now, can you feel the ground? It is beginning to shake. Pry me away, hey, 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 yeah. Pry me away, hey, yeah, yeah. Pry me away, hey, 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 yeah. You can, I don't think you can. Feel how cold the air can be, how he can be lost so quickly through the window of opportunity, just like a draft in the night. See how words can twist and hands can ring like phones inside empty homes when nobody's there to hear. Oh, do you hear me, dear? Oh, pry me away, hey, 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 yeah. Pry me away, hey, hey, yeah. Pry me away, hey, 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 yeah. If you can, I don't think you can. We are black and blue. There are more than won't make me. Oh, oh, yeah. Tear me away, hey, 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 yeah. Tear me away, hey, yeah, yeah. Tear me away, hey, 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 yeah. You can, I don't think you can. I don't think you can. I don't think you can. See how when you hold me, how gently I unfold. See how you can really just open me wide.